Don't worry about it, Seal. I know absolutely nothing about this game.
That's good.
Although I do know that it has a meta ending of sorts, with the seer offices and such.
Never mind.
So the first thing you might notice is a much more elaborate presentation compared to the previous. Some of the imagery the game presents you with is rather stunning. However, notice that I didn't use the word improved when describing it. For every screen that looks cool, we have one that looks rather lame. Interesting, dull. Good, bad, intriguing, stupid. It's a mixed bag, which is something I couldn't say about the much less elaborate visuals of Space Quest 2, which were a distinct step forward from the first one in pretty much every single way. It's much more ambitious here, I'll give it that, but I feel like there was something stylish to the moody jungles and space stations of the predecessor. It's like the color schemes were bolder and more defined, while here the screens more often than not feel like a mishmash of colors that gets even more undefined since, like the other Sierra titles at the time, they've tried to create a sense of shading or gradient, how we call it. Just look, the wall in the background is not just blue, for example, but blue mixed in with white to give it an illusion of a lighter shade of blue. It's like every image here is made out of differently colored grains of sand.
George, can you imagine the effort that went into making those visuals?
I know, and I admit they do look kind of cool, mostly. Just that to my mind, Space Quest 2 looked quite a bit cooler. For some reason I keep saying the word cool this episode.
What is definitely something the 90s kids would find cool is those overabundant pop culture references spread around with seemingly no rhyme or reason. Honestly, it's the thing that bugs me the most about those graphics. Space Quest was never a stranger to an occasional homage, but here it's just pushing it. It's like, how am I supposed to get immersed into this game when it seems to be, well, a junkyard of other media icons?
Speaking of junk, care to elaborate about the whole charade in the Space Quest 2 video?
Well, I was going to, but later. As I've told you.
Considering how grand of a liar you are, I've decided to speed up the matter.
You know, being a traitor is even worse than being a liar. I've told you that off screen for a reason, you know?
Yeah, whatever.
The reason I pretended was because Space Quest 2 ended on a sour, open-ended note, so I wanted the video to end the same way, and also to provoke some conversation. A long-time subscriber, Beruga, sorry if I got your name wrong, dude, had an interesting take. Perhaps it is to balance the difficulty with light-hearted elements. I would think that a frustrating puzzle is less frustrating when the character is in a ridiculous situation rather than a serious one. And that definitely does make sense, especially in the case of Day of the Tentacle that he used. Another explanation I'm quite fond of is escapism. The adventure gameplay, more so than of any other genre, is a gameplay of interaction between the player and his environment. The rooms are not just backgrounds, they are literally what you have to interact with through gameplay, finding items, identifying and solving puzzles. This pushes the significance of those backgrounds to the foreground, making their presence more significant in not just the action, but also in the player's mind. He is now actively inhabiting the setting, becoming a part of it. So making the setting pleasant to be in makes perfect sense. If he's going to be immersed into this environment, why not make it joyous?
But if I had to pick, I would say that the most accurate answer would be the simplest one. For an adventure fan, puzzles are fun. The jokes are also fun. So it only makes sense to accompany one with the other to make a fun game.
So you were lying for no reason at all. How typical of you.
Hey, it's in the spirit of things. We aren't playing Ultima 4 anymore. Aren't adventure game protagonists usually tricksters?
Sure. Whatever you say, George.
What is undeniably great about this game, however, is its structure progression. Look at the junkyard, for example, which serves as this game's opening stage. You start off in a room with 2 exits and 1 object that you can't do anything with, yet. Unsolvable puzzle number 1. Going right leads you down a series of rooms, one pertaining a missable item, culminating in a dead end with a functioning ship that needs repairs. This is not only the second unsolvable puzzle you've discovered through exploration, but also the ultimate puzzle of this entire level. You need to fix this ship to get off the junkyard, and for that you have to find the warp motivator and an auxiliary reactor. One of those you've discovered already. It's this immovable object from the start. So now all we have to do is figure out how to move it.
You see what I mean about progression? Through our initial exploration of the area, we get a distinct goal by learning what items we need to acquire. And because of that knowledge, we can actually start thinking about how to get them.
We are now actively looking for a reactor and thinking of a way to put the motivator into a ship. With this newly discovered sense of purpose, we shall now explore the other pathway from the start. Here we discover a conveyor belt, riding which leads us to, first, a dangerous situation to keep things from getting boring, and second, an entire second floor to the junkyard. This is something to appreciate here, this defined sense of geography. The emphasized verticality makes the junkyard feel like an enclosed system rather than a random arrangement of rooms. This verticality is further defined when you fall down a trash chute and find yourself in a pit below the junkyard's ground floor. You have to climb up to get back to neutral ground. Considering that the dead end with the ship was also in a place to which you had to climb down, we now have a distinct hierarchic map of this area in our heads, making it feel like an actual place. So far so great. We've had a prolonged exploratory sequence, unsolvable puzzles, which become solvable during your exploration, and a defined goal, which gives you a reason to explore and makes it clear what the puzzles even are.
It's like this game hits every single mark of a great adventure game that I've covered in my Monkey Island video. But what if I were to tell you that there is one little detail that I've been purposely neglecting so far? A rather important detail that somewhat changes this whole idyllic junkyard we've been so lovingly exploring up until this point.
You see, getting into the ship, the one in which we get our ultimate goal that defines this progression, is actually a puzzle of its own. So what, you might say? It doesn't change anything. Well, yeah, it wouldn't have, if not for the fact that the item needed for entering the ship is not only the last item you find during your exploration, but it is the most difficult puzzle of the entire game. You are most likely going to find the reactor and the means of putting the motivator into the ship, and the wires which you are supposed to realize you need only after putting the reactor into the ship, before actually getting the ship's computer to tell you that you need them. Now, this may not come across as clearly on a video as it would during a playthrough, but this detail changes the entire progression of this section for the worst. Had you known what items and why you need them, you would actually be, having a reason to get those items. Getting the reactor, for instance, gets you beat up, possibly even killed. So why would you pick it up then? Well, because it's a Sierra adventure game, that's why. It would be stupid not to at least try to pick everything pick-upable. What would be motivated by common sense and reason is now done purely out of adventure game reflex. In other words, with this little mistake, the developers took the thought out of puzzle solving and immersion out of gameplay. You feel not like you're trying to escape a life-threatening situation by fixing a ship anymore, but just like you're playing a video game.
Aren't you exaggerating a bit?
I would say not. It's like the literal difference between being immersed into the game, feel like you are the protagonist of a story, and simply going through the motions, motivated by nothing but the bizarre adventure game logic.
In fact, do you want to know how I figured out the solution to this puzzle? I had mistakenly typed use ladder towards what is actually a giant cord and got this message, which was basically a dead giveaway that the ladder is an item that I will have in my possession. How did I know that? Is it because I saw a ladder nearby and, using my human logic that I have due to being human, decided I might use it to climb onto the ship? No, it's because this message could only appear when the text parser recognizes a word as a usable item. So using adventure game logic, I have tried picking up the only ladder I saw nearby, even though it would never cross my puny human mind.
Day of the Tentacle had a very similar puzzle with the keys in the door, but you didn't seem to mind it there.
Well, it's not just this puzzle that I have a problem with, Seal. There is a bigger issue with this game, which I would like to discuss.
As you are probably all too familiar by now, the text insert gameplay lives or dies by its text parser, whose value is determined by how lenient it is in terms of its vocabulary and how much feedback it gives to the player. So how does Space Quest 3 hold up in that regard? Seizes water cooler. Let's type look at cooler. No response. When I type look at water, however, I get the description for the cooler. Or how about this? See those Half-Life style grabbers beneath the overhang, which the game classifies as pods in the room description. Surely, using the very nouns the game gives you will yield results when utilized. Think again. There is literally no text description given to you about those very noticeable creatures. It's not a cherry-picked example, mind you. I can't look at the wing, at the seismograph, at the notes on the walls, at this crystal here. Hell, even when I can look at stuff, it's not any better. See all those items in the background of the shop. Surely they wouldn't have spent all this time drawing them if I couldn't look at them. But no matter what I look at, I get the same generalized description. The same goes for the aliens at the Monolith Burger, the offices, and... Now that's just mean.
It's like all the effort of the artists that drew those backgrounds is being undermined by both the lazy writer and the programmer behind this text parser, who were cutting every corner they could potentially cut.
I mean, seriously, it's bad enough that the game doesn't acknowledge my attempt to talk to the giant snake. But, come on, when I try to talk to the accountants, I get the same dialog box as when looking at them. It's like the game sees the word accountant and gives the only programmed response when addressing them, no matter what verb I use. It's lazy programming. There is no way around it. How else can you explain that, paradoxically, during the junkyard, the opening location, almost every object has a description? Well, almost. But the further in the game you go, the less feedback you get. It's like they simply started running off steam. Even at the junkyard, the responses were rather bizarre. Don't worry about this, it's just something the artist drew for some reason. I originally thought that this was some clever Monkey Island style breaking of the fourth wall, but considering how lazy it gets eventually, I do get the get off my back vibe from this game. Like the writers were forcing themselves to write without any real desire to do so.
There are a lot of examples like this, enough to say that this lackluster text parser severely damages the overall gameplay. It's not King's Quest 1 per se, but I am reminded of it, which is not a good sign.
But okay, maybe I'm jumping the gun a bit here. There has to be good gameplay for it to be ruined in the first place. Remember the backwards way that I solved the most difficult puzzle in the game? It's not the only time. You see, there is this lava planet upon which you have to more or less blow up the giant force field generator, and there is the second most difficult puzzle of the game on this planet. Is it about getting past the guards, you ask? Is it about finding the weak point in the structure? Is it about wiring the generator to self-explode? Well, no. In fact, the only two guards on the entire planet, mind you, just go away for no reason, leaving behind a box full of thermal detonators, conveniently, which you throw down a giant unavoidable hole at the top of the unguarded structure. If that wasn't easy enough, the lazy programming rears its ugly head again, since you can type basically anything, and the game will still enact the solution. I literally typed "put detonator on ground", and Roger threw it down the shaft anyway. What is even the point of all this? Where is the puzzle solving here? Where are the people that designed those brilliant Space Quest 2 puzzles, which required ingenuity not just in terms of which items to use, but also in how to use them? If anything, Space Quest 3 made me look back even more fondly at that game. I even replayed it just to be sure, and yes, the difference is staggering. I mean, yeah, Space Quest 2 had a couple puzzles that was solved is the word used, but those were exceptions in an exceptionally designed game. If anything, Space Quest 3 begs for a point-click interface. It wants to be liberated of having to do work. As proof of this, just look. This is the difficult puzzle I was talking about. Getting across this gap. Don't ask me how does it make narrative sense to have this be the challenge, while enacting guerrilla warfare is less challenging than ordering food at McDonald's. But hey, we are talking about a game where using a ladder is more difficult than fixing a spaceship for interstellar travel. So what did I expect? But anyway, that's not the problem here. Look, that's an anemometer. I hope I said that right. The game says so. I can look at it. It is an anemometer. So why can't I take it? Because I don't need it? Well, I do. So why can't I take it? Because you have to type "take pole" to take anemometer. Yeah, and here I thought that having to type "put wires in hole" to connect wires to the reactor instead of typing, well, "connect wires to the reactor" was bad. The punchline of this entire thing, right, is that even with this terrible text parser, this puzzle is still too easy. All I have to do is type "use pole" and the puzzle solves itself. What if I intended to use it differently? Maybe I wanted to put it across the gap so that I could walk across. But no, use pole it is. No skill or thought necessary.
So yeah, it's really not looking good for this game. Both the puzzles and the text parser with which you solve them are a mess. But I don't want you to think that this game is just god-awful in terms of gameplay, because there is a couple of highlights here and there.
The feel-bad yes, the feel-bad planet is the absolute best part of the game. Firstly, there is this Terminator dude, which the game foreshadows in a cutscene after your first light speed jump. When entering Philbot, which might be after the Monolith Burgers, but no matter, you see him land alongside with you, thus extending this foreshadowing. The exploration of the planet leads you to discover numerous ways for you to die, which plays into the leitmotif of the player's emasculation, validating his future triumphs, mind you. However, it doesn't aggravate the player, since he is still in his exploration mode. Eventually, the player enters the store, which is a very well done scene. There are postcards to see, a hint as to what you need to sell to the shopkeeper to get money. The alien himself is greatly animated. The only problem here is the lack of descriptions for the various items on the store shelves. But as to whether or not it ruins the shop, I'd say definitely not. It's a great scene. You get ambushed by the Terminator upon leaving the store, which gives you 10 seconds to run, before he hunts you down. If you try to get into your ship, he kills you. This is the best puzzle in the game by far, because you now have to use all the things that were killing you when you were exploring to kill the Terminator. It's a complete turnaround. What was once an obstacle becomes a tool in taking out your greatest threat. There are even 2 solutions to this puzzle, both of which are equally fun and well realized.
It's a genuinely excellent adventure game design, which almost makes me forget that this absolute high point of Space Quest 3 is basically a regular occurrence for the original Space Quest.
There is also this unique puzzle, which is also quite cool. You get this encrypted message at the end screen of an arcade game at the Monolith Burgers, and you actually have to manually translate it by hand, which is exactly what I did. Let's see. Help us. We are being held captive by Scumsoft, an impenetrable force field. I wish. 2 guys in trouble.
George, I think you are stalling.
Wait. I think I'm starting to get what this game is trying to do.
Just think about it. With forceful breaking remarks like, don't worry about this item, it's just part of the background drawn by some hack artist, you know who you are. The game draws attention to itself as a video game that is made by someone. The player is aware that he is playing a game, like in Monkey Island, instead of losing himself in the atmosphere like in Trial by Fire. This gets interesting since, unlike Monkey Island, where the game itself was the butt of the joke, with the developers laughing at it with you, in Space Quest 3 it is the player who is being laughed upon. The game is either mocking the player for typing incorrect sentences or straight up killing him, which in itself is something worth commenting upon. It's when the writer breaks the pretense and mocks the player or kills him is when he actually seems most authentic. Just look, in Space Quest 2 you could fall down from a cliff and get up, but in Space Quest 3, even though falling from a lesser height, you die, get a very disturbing image of your death, and a mocking joke. It's still not that big of a deal since you can reload, however it is enough to shift the tone of the adventure from neutral, like in Space Quest 1, and cartoony, like in Space Quest 2, to almost passive-aggressive one. It feels like the developers hate you and try to hide it, only manifesting it when you make mistakes. This tone fits perfectly with the prevalent forceful breaking style of the game, since if not for the meta elements, this passive aggression would remain nebulous and faceless. But now, since the player is aware that this is a game made by those people, this aggression gets attached to the nefarious developer who is laughing at your expense. It all clicks together with this final piece of information. Those developers, the ones that torture you with those ridiculously difficult puzzles and mock you, are inside the game.
This game is not difficult.
I mean difficult in the sense that this is a Sierra game with a text-parser.
Even keeping that in mind, this game is very easy.
But still, do you see what happens? The developer, that is the root of your suffering, the very one that made this offensive game, is here. I don't know how the game will play this card in the future, of course, but there is serious potential here. Remember how I said that Space Quest 1 raises the stakes of play through Dead Man Walking Syndrome and the text insert interface, legitimizing the challenge and then rewards the player with not just points but cutscenes? Well, in Space Quest 3 they potentially go even further. The deaths are more gory, the writing is more spiteful, those cutscenes are spoiled through trial and error, the puzzles are more ridiculous than ever, and the dead man walking syndrome is still present.
You can't get stuck in this game, George. I don't know what you're on about.
Okay, still, I'm trying to make a point here. Could you at least let me finish?
Fine.
The point is, this game infuriates the player. It does get under his nerves with mockery that feels like the only genuine piece of writing in this entire game, while everything else seems forced and dishonest. When you get the ship and triumphantly take off, you enter a purely trial and error section, with each error leading you to a different yet equally horrible end with equally mean mockery.
So imagine that those same people who created this mean-spirited torture device for a video game are inside that video game. You know what that means, right? When we do get to Sierra offices, we are going to kill those sons of bitches!
Wait, what?
We are going to make them pay for all the bullshit they've put us through, not just in this game, but the entirety of the series.
George, I don't know if this is...
Just think about this. A text adventure like Space Quest 1, for example, is basically a series of obstacles that the developer created to challenge the player, right?
Yes, so?
So, by using meta-narrative, this game essentially cuts the bullshit out of this dynamic. It openly admits that what this entire experience is about is not some sort of a space adventure, but a confrontation between the developer, who created a challenging gameplay, and the player, who tries to beat the developer at his own game.
But you can't know that for sure, right? You haven't beaten the game yet.
Come on, it's the only possible thing they could be building towards. They've purposely ruined the immersion and atmosphere of the game, purposely made the text parser unsatisfying and the puzzles unfun, so that it would increase the satisfaction of the eventual killing of the developers of such a poorly designed game. It's actually ingenious when you think about it. Space Quest 1 was restrained by the notion of making a space adventure. It was restrained by the fourth wall, so by breaking it, Space Quest 3 manages to give an entire another dimension to this experience. It drops the facade. The developers are here to torture you, but give you the opportunity to fight back and beat them at their own game.
This reminds me of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy game, in which Douglas Adams was basically messing with the player in any way he could. How would you compare that game to Space Quest 3?
I haven't played that one actually.
But you have it framed on your wall.
Yeah, that's just meant to be a reference to the book, which to my mind served as one of the inspirations for the Space Quest series. The game just had a better poster, in my opinion.
So you've read the book at least?
Oh yes, here it is actually. It's great.
What about the rest of them?
The rest of them.
Never mind.
I might have been too hard on the game now that I think about it, even though the Junkyard's progression is a bit undermined with this inaccessible ship. What comes after is not. After successfully overcoming its puzzles and entering space, you are presented with an array of 3 whole planets to explore. At first I was reminded of Mass Effect, but it's a bit more restricted than that. You can't survive on a lava planet or pay for anything at the Monolith Burgers until you get money and thermal underwear from Philbot. Jesus Christ, it starts to sound like a Rick and Morty episode.
The important part is, even though the game is linear, having this early glimpse at future locations both prolong the original exploration of the game and make their eventual accessibility feel like a long sought after puzzle solution, like an achievement.
It's not inherently better than sequential progression, mind you, it's just a different type of function structure. Space Quest 1 emphasizes the player's progress, which is fitting for a game where you can get stuck, while Space Quest 3 goes into a more user-friendly direction that would become embodied by Somi the following year. Since the gameplay challenge is not as defined without the dead man walking syndrome, you have to craft satisfaction through those unsolvable until further notice puzzles.
Why did you chastise the goblins so much in the Somi video then?
Well, because it went too far with its linearity, alright? Space Quest had those long transitional cutscenes that highlighted your achievements and exploration at the start of each new segment. There was pacing during the playthrough. It allowed the player some time to relax and enjoy his victory. Goblins is basically rapid-fire puzzle solving. The sense of victory and exploration gets completely blurred in that array of puzzles. Plus, that game had quite a few problems of its own, but that is a story for another day.
Still doesn't explain why.
Everything can be fun when implemented correctly, okay? No game mechanic is inherently bad. And if you think you know one that is, there's a game out there to prove you wrong. Goblins is not great, but Portal, which is pretty much the same exact thing, is great.
Fair enough.
By the way, I think I found the developers.
It's perfect. They are completely defenseless. And I have a vaporizer. Yeah, I was waiting for this. Wait, thank you for saving us? No, you kill! What? Don't step on the guys? Oh, I got you. Was getting worried there for a second. Could you stop running away, please? You can't squish them, can you?
That's funny.
No, it is not. Somi did this very joke at the game's expense. It was the climactic moment of the game, when the player is supposed to feel the excitement and look back with fondness over his experience, so giving him this dialogue option, which he may or may not use by the way, undermines this climactic moment, leaving the game looking like a fool. The game was the butt of the joke, not the player, as is the case here. It's the developer openly teasing the player after not only extensively mocking him every time he dies or quits the game, but also after exhibiting this amount of laziness in terms of design. It's like putting salt on a fresh wound.
I don't know, I still find it humorous.
Anyway, I was wrong. This game is stupid. In fact, if anything, the meta here is done purely out of creative impotency of the writers who, let's not forget, wrote the same story twice in a row before.
You see, meta is a powerful narrative tool, yet it shouldn't be used callously. There is a thing called subversion of disbelief, which allows fiction to draw the viewer in. It allows him to feel the gravity of the events, turning the spectacle of the Battle of the Helm in The Lord of the Rings into a powerful, emotional scene. During the viewing, you sort of lose yourself in the world of the film, forgetting that you are, well, watching a film. Metafiction, on the other hand, negates the subversion of disbelief. It prevents you from losing yourself in the world of the story by drawing attention to itself as a fictional product. There's a reason as to why so many meta-narratives only put the fourth wall breaking revelations at the end, because up until that revelation the story worked as a conventional, immersive narrative. And even then those revelations have to be justified, otherwise they would just ruin the preceding experience. So let me ask you, what is the point of meta in Space Quest 3? In Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Monkey Island 2, for example, it was done for the sake of comedy. The endings of those works served as subversive, anticlimactic punchlines at precisely the right moments, which turned their whole stories into jokes. Well, where is the subversive punchline in Space Quest 3? The whole game has a thick layer of self-awareness. If anything, it builds up to the Sierra offices, so they don't come as a comedic surprise. Furthermore, what is the joke here? What does this revelation subvert? In Monty Python, it was quite a bit jarring to have the film end so abruptly, and Monkey Island 2 basically turns the entire story on its head with its ending, as well as poking fun at the player for rolling along with it.
Monkey Island 1 did the exact same thing, yet you've praised it.
Yes, but Monkey Island used meta for a reason. It was subverting the tropes and conventions of adventure games. The best moments of Somi are the ones in which it plays around with the interface and pokes fun at itself. If it hadn't broken the fourth wall, it wouldn't be able to pull off all those jokes. It sacrificed atmosphere and immersion for the sake of making the most out of the game's comedic potential. In comparison, there are no such clever jokes in Space Quest 3. It plays out the same exact way as any other Sierra adventure game. It just has the developer's self-insert characters in it, and ends in a way that doesn't satisfy anyone but them. It feels more like fanfiction than metafiction, or meta-comedy for that matter. So once again, what is the point of all this? Or even a better question, what's the point of playing this game at all? The puzzles, even if they hadn't been ruined by the horrible text parser, are nothing to brag home about. The gameplay is lacking, the humor is questionable, the atmosphere is ruined by meta, as is immersion by the lack of feedback and limited vocabulary. What is left? Minigames? The only good thing you can say about Space Quest 3 is that it's playable. It's easy enough not to get infuriating and has just enough good moments to not be tiresome. It's a perfectly bland game, which offers nothing yet demands nothing as well. Space Quest 1 was infuriating, and that's what's good about it. Because of those lows within the playthrough, the moments of triumph, victory and vindication were 10 times more satisfying, which is why I compared it to a roller coaster of emotions. But Space Quest 3 is more like a ride on a bus between two, let's hope, vastly better games than itself.
So yeah, if you are on a Space Quest marathon like I am, then this game is a functional, playable, occasionally even fun experience that you can hopefully get through without a brain hemorrhage. But on its own merits, this game is, well, mediocre. But hey Seal, what would your score be for that game?
I don't deal in scores, George. It's a quality game. It's excellently paced, wonderfully presented, has a distinct personality, and, contrary to what you've said, it is quite atmospheric. If Space Quest 1 is the best of the three, then this one is the most interesting one, and I'm sad that you don't see it.
Well, you didn't seem to like Space Quest 2 as much as I, but I wasn't complaining now, was I?
Not on camera you didn't.
You absolute